Welcome back and thanks for staying with Newzroom Afrika. Now, the United States and the United Kingdom have launched a series of strikes against the Iran-aligned Houthi rebels in Yemen. Now, the Houthi have been accused of attacking foreign vessels in the Red Sea. The airstrikes have triggered widespread protests in Yemen and other Middle Eastern countries. There are concerns, of course, that the airstrikes could also spark further instability in the region, given the conflict in Gaza. Let's make sense of all of this now. Bring in Daily Maverick Associate Editor Brook Spector, who joins us via our video link this morning. And it's lovely to have you on the program, sir. Thanks as always for making time. You know, I don't want to take it for granted that even well-informed viewers of this channel have a grasp of the significance of what's taking place in the region itself. The Houthis have always supported Hamas, even after the October 7th attack on Israel. But why is it so important that the UK and the US have now responded like this?
Well, that's an important question as to why the significance strategically of the attacks, both by Houthi missiles and the responses by the U.S. and, in a more minor role, Britain, and in fact some support from a few other nations. If you look at a map, realize that Yemen really is right at the point of access and entry into the Red Sea, and thus on to the Suez Canal, and thus to Europe and the rest of the Middle East and North Africa. At its closest, narrowest point, it's only about 20 kilometers across, which means that many missiles, many drones, many, even artillery shells can make that distance. The significance is that a major chunk of world commerce, not just American, not just British, but all nations, Danish companies like Maersk and many others, routinely ship their goods via the Suez Canal and thus via the Red Sea and thus via the straits right next to Yemen. Now, the problem is that when you close those straits to shipping, or when shippers decide that the insurance costs and the risk to cargo is so great that they have to go the long way around Africa, passing by Cape Town, obviously, it adds significant costs to any shipment by any tanker, by any freighter, and this in turn pushes up the prices on the goods, because there are more insurance costs, there are more salary costs for the seamen, there's more fuel costs, goods take longer to get to their destination in either direction, and so the ripple effect is large. It's a real choke point in world trade, in the same way as the Strait of Malacca in Southeast Asia is a choke point of shipping going into and out of East Asia, Japan, China, Korea, and so forth, or the Strait of Gibraltar, which guards the access to the Mediterranean in one direction or into the Atlantic by way of the other. And if we look historically, though, at the Houthis, this is not the first time around for them firing on ships. There have been other examples in the past years which were clearly not connected to the current hostilities in Gaza. Although this is obviously now both a convenient excuse and a leverage point for them. To understand the Houthis, they are rebels in Yemen. Yemen is now a merging of two Yemen states. One was the old Kingdom of Yemen, and the other was the British Protectorate of Aden. They came together, and the resulting country has very rarely been stable and managed effectively by a government, as opposed to warring tribes, warring factions. In fact, back in the 1950s, there was a rebellion in the Kingdom of Yemen, backed respectively by Saudi Arabia and Egypt. So these divisions run long, they run deep, and they run dangerously to affect stability and trade.
Right.
The problem with the response attacks, and I gather there were about 60 missiles or other strikes on various sites for Houthi missiles, is that even the Pentagon admits that it was not entirely and completely successful, partly because so many of the Houthi missiles are on mobile vehicles which can be moved from one place to the next, obviously, without prior warning. And so that means to some degree there is the possibility of yet further strikes to finish off what they were unable to do in the first place.
Sure.
Or whatever might happen next. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. And, just to that point, Reuters reporting just a few hours ago that the Houthis have come out to say that their own response to airstrikes overnight will be strong and effective. It sounds like yet another declaration of war here in a context where, as we've mentioned, there's already such great hostilities not too far off in Gaza. And as we make sense of the implications, I mean, it's just been one major event after the other for the world economy, hasn't it? COVID-19 came around, then it was the Ukraine war, now there's been concerns around what's taking place in Gaza, and we're yet to quantify just how big a blow even this leg of the conflict, if you like, will be on the world economy.
Well, I've seen estimates that say the additional cost of a major super tanker or one of those giant container freighters that we see, the ones with the large boxes piled up 8 deep and all the way across the thing. It's an extra $1 million a day if you have to go the long route. And so inevitably you and I and everybody else pay the price when we buy something in the store that came by sea. Air freight's a little different, obviously. The problem, I guess, is that what we thought of, if you roll our minds back to 2018, what we thought was a fairly stable international economic and transportation order has now been, just as you say, the cards have been shuffled in ways which not many of us would appreciate unless you're trying to bring down the international economic circumstances or to cause chaos in them or to shift the balances of forces elsewhere. And I think there is where the nub of your question ultimately lies. How much of a connection is there between what the Houthis and their opponents, Western nations, are doing and just, for example, the fighting in Gaza or the possibility of fighting in southern Lebanon, northern Israel, or for that matter, the way in which Iran would continue to support and by how much its allied forces, Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. We just don't know, and that is what makes a lot of people very nervous.
Sure, absolutely. Look, this is a difficult question to ask because even I don't have the answer to it, but given what's at stake, is there any other way through which the UK and the US could have responded to this? I mean, understanding, of course, that the Houthi rebel group itself had already launched attacks on several ships that are heading to Israel because of their alliance to Hamas. But one has to ask the question about whether there's any way around this.
Well, it wasn't just ships heading to Israel, although that was sort of an after-the-fact explanation. It's commercial shipping more generally that gets affected by this because people who run these things decide it's not worth the risk and the trouble and the cost. And so it disrupts the entire trading system. As I say, sending ships around the Cape of Good Hope, which is, good if you're a maritime services company in Cape Town, but not so good if you're a shipper. But to the extent to which there is anything any other thing that could be done, I suspect in Washington, in Whitehall, in London, they're staying up late at night trying to game just that particular question. Obviously, a ground forces launch against the Houthis is almost certainly out of the thinking, if for no other reason that would require very large numbers of forces, lots of logistics, and would bring even further chaos potentially in yet other places. So I think we're stuck with, to some degree, this mutual exchange of rockets into Red Sea shipping, responses by Western nations against the people who shot the rockets, and back and forth and back and forth. It's not. I'm sorry, I can't give you a good, easy answer as to, well, if they'd only follow my plan here, it would work out. I don't think anybody has a fully fleshed out, thought through plan, because it's just one more of these things that don't seem to have an easy out.